The wreckage stretched for miles, twisted metal spires jutting from scorched earth like broken teeth. Lieutenant Jacob Hayes crouched behind a collapsed transport, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The evacuation order had come 3 hours ago, but he'd stayed behind to retrieve encrypted data from the command post. That's when he heard it, a low, pained growl that didn't sound human. Jacob moved carefully through the debris field, pulse rifle raised. The sound led him to a crater where a massive figure lay slumped against shattered armor plating. She was Wraith, one of the alien warriors whose forces had been decimating human colonies for 2 years. She was also dying. Her silvery blue skin was torn in multiple places, dark blood pooling beneath her. The armor covering her torso had been shredded by plasma fire. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and her forearms lay limp at her sides. She was at least 7 feet tall, with sharp facial features and luminous amber eyes that tracked his approach with fading awareness. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away. These warriors had killed thousands of his people. His brother had died in the assault on Europa Station. But Jacob saw something in those eyes, not hatred, but resignation. Acceptance of death with dignity. He couldn't do it. Couldn't leave her. Easy, he murmured, kneeling beside her. I'm going to help. She tried to speak, but only managed a wet cough. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. Jacob worked quickly, applying synthetic skin patches to the worst wounds. He injected biofoam to stabilize internal bleeding, then used his last energy cell to power the emergency stasis field around her torso. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, field medic training from a lifetime ago. The Wraith warrior watched him with growing intensity. Her breathing steadied. Color began returning to her skin. Why, she finally rasped in accented but clear English. You know what I am. I know you're hurt, Jacob replied, not meeting her eyes. That's enough. She struggled to sit up, and he helped support her weight. Up close, he could see the intricate patterns tattooed across her shoulders, battle honors, he realized. This wasn't just any soldier. This was someone of rank. Her hand, surprisingly gentle despite its size, gripped his wrist. I am Commander Caliph of the Third Spear. You have given me my life when you had every right to take it. I'm not an executioner. You are more than that. Her amber eyes locked onto his with startling intensity. By the ancient codes of my people, I am now bound to you. My life, my blade, my oath, they belong to you until this debt is repaid. Jacob stared at her. I don't want. It is not a choice, Caliph interrupted, her voice gaining strength. It is sacred law. From this moment, Jacob Hayes, I am yours. The words hung between them as explosions echoed in the distance. The war continued, but something fundamental had shifted in that crater. Jacob had saved an enemy. And that enemy had just become something else entirely. 3 weeks later, Jacob stood in the debriefing room at Forward Base Arcturus, feeling like he'd stepped into an alternate reality. Caliph stood beside him, clean, healed, and somehow even more imposing in formal attire that left her muscular shoulders bare. General Morrison sat across the table, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. Let me get this straight. You brought back an enemy commander, and she's now, what, exactly? Oathbound, Caliph answered before Jacob could speak. Lieutenant Hayes holds my life debt. I serve him until the debt is satisfied. That could be never, the general pointed out. Then I serve forever. No hesitation. Morrison's eyes shifted to Jacob. And you're comfortable with this arrangement? Jacob hesitated. Comfortable wasn't the word. The past 3 weeks had been surreal. Caliph had surrendered willingly, provided intelligence on Wraith tactical positions, and refused to leave his side. She'd been assigned quarters near his, but mostly she just followed him. Stood outside his door. Accompanied him to the mess hall, where her presence caused whispers and stares. I trust her, Jacob finally said. You trust her, Morrison repeated flatly. Hayes, her people killed your brother. The words hit like physical blows. Jacob's jaw tightened. I know exactly what her people did. Calipha's hand moved, not toward a weapon, but settling on Jacob's shoulder. The gesture was possessive, protective. The one who killed his brother died by my blade 3 days ago. I made certain. The room fell silent. Jacob turned to stare at her. You what? I accessed the battle records. I identified the warrior responsible. Her amber eyes met his, fierce and unapologetic. He will not kill again. Something cracked in Jacob's chest, grief, rage, and something else he couldn't name. You didn't have to do that. Yes, Caliph said simply, I did. That night, Jacob found her on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The base was quiet, lights dimmed for night cycle. You should be resting, he said, approaching slowly. I rest when you rest. She didn't turn, but he saw her reflection in the reinforced glass. That is how oaths work. Caliph. He struggled for words. About my brother. Thank you, but. You think it was only duty. Now she did turn, and the intensity in her gaze made his breath catch. You do not understand, Jacob. When you saved me, when you showed mercy no human had ever shown of Wraith, you became sacred to me. Not just protected, but cherished. She moved closer, and Jacob realized how much he'd grown accustomed to her presence. Her height, her strength, the way she moved like controlled violence barely leashed. Your people have a word, she continued, her voice dropping lower. Devotion. That is what you purchased with your kindness. I didn't want to purchase anything. Her hand cupped his face, and he fell silent. Her skin was warm, slightly rougher than human skin but not unpleasant. I know. That is why it means everything. They stood there, close enough that Jacob could feel the heat radiating from her body. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was insane. She was alien, former enemy, from a culture he barely understood. But when she leaned down and pressed her forehead to his of Wraith gesture of deep trust, Jacob found himself leaning into it. I protect what is mine, Caliph whispered. And you, Jacob Hayes, are mine in ways that transcend warfare and bloodshed. Do you understand? He did. God help him, he did. The attack came at dawn. Wraith forces, learning that Commander Caliph had defected, launched a targeted strike on forward base Arcturus. Jacob woke to alarms and Caliph's hand on his chest, pressing him back into the bed. Stay down, she commanded, already moving toward the door. Like hell. Jacob grabbed his rifle, pulling on his tactical vest. We fight together. She turned, and something fierce and proud flashed in her amber eyes. Then stay close. The base was chaos. Plasma fire streaked through the corridors. Jacob and Caliph moved as a unit, he provided covering fire while she advanced with brutal efficiency, her forearms wielding twin energy blades that cut through armor like paper. They reached the command center where General Morrison was coordinating the defense. A Wraith strike team had breached the eastern wall. Hayes. Morrison shouted over the noise. Get to the auxiliary generator. If they take that out. We're on it, Jacob interrupted, already moving. The generator room was 3 levels down. They fought through 2 squads of Wraith soldiers, and Jacob watched in awe as Caliph moved, every motion precise, deadly, beautiful in its violence. She was protecting him, he realized, positioning herself to intercept fire meant for him. In the generator room, they found Commander Thex, Caliph's former superior. Traitor, Thex snarled in the Wraith language. You shame your bloodline. Caliph responded in the same tongue, words Jacob didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. She stepped in front of Jacob, blades ready. The fight was vicious. Thex was skilled, experienced, and furious. But Caliph fought with something Thex didn't have: absolute purpose. When it was over, Thex lay dead, and Caliph was bleeding from a deep gash across her ribs. Jacob immediately moved to treat it, his hands shaking slightly. I'm okay, she said, catching his wrist. You're bleeding. Jacob. She pulled him closer, until they were face to face. I would bleed oceans for you. The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Jacob's hands were still on her ribs, feeling the rapid beat of her dual hearts beneath his palms. Adrenaline, fear, and something else entirely surged through him. Caliph, I. She kissed him. It wasn't gentle. Her mouth was fierce against his, demanding and possessive. Jacob made a sound somewhere between surprise and surrender, hands gripping her shoulders as he kissed back. She was warm, strong, and utterly overwhelming. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Calitha's expression was fierce with want. I claim you, Jacob Hayes. Not as duty. As desire. His response was to pull her back down, kissing her with all the fear and longing he'd been suppressing for weeks. Her hands roamed his body, careful of her strength but unmistakably possessive. He felt small in her arms but not fragile, cherished, protected, claimed. They made it back to his quarters somehow, the base secure but their need urgent. Caliph was surprisingly gentle as she undressed him, her four hands exploring his body with reverent attention. Jacob traced the tattoos across her shoulders, down her sides, learning the geography of her. When she finally lowered herself onto him, filling his vision with silvery blue skin and amber eyes dark with desire, Jacob knew he was lost. They moved together in the darkness, finding rhythms that transcended species. Her strength could have broken him, but instead she held him like something precious. And when she cried out his name in that moment of release, it sounded like prayer and promise combined. Afterwards, curled against her chest, listening to the dual rhythm of her hearts, Jacob understood the weight of an oath. It wasn't just her life she'd given him. It was everything. Word spread fast. A human lieutenant and a Wraith commander, enemies who'd become lovers. The media devoured it. Some called it a symbol of peace. Others called it treason. Jacob sat in General Morrison's office 3 days after the attack, Caliph standing behind his chair like a sentinel. The High Command wants her transferred, Morrison said bluntly. They're saying you're compromised. I'm more effective now than I've ever been, Jacob countered. My last 3 missions have had 0 casualties. Calitha's intelligence has saved lives. That's not the point. Morrison leaned forward. You're sleeping with the enemy. She's not the enemy anymore. Tell that to the families of the dead. Morrison's voice wasn't cruel, just tired. Hayes, I believe you. But this is bigger than belief. There are protocols, regulations. Regulations written before anyone imagined this situation, Caliph interrupted, her voice calm but carrying an edge. Before anyone imagined peace might be possible. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Is that what this is? Peace? It's a beginning. She placed her hand on Jacob's shoulder. Your people and mine have been fighting for generations. Perhaps it takes something this unconventional to break the cycle. The meeting ended without resolution, but Jacob could feel the walls closing in. Political pressure, military bureaucracy, fear of the unknown, all of it conspiring to tear them apart. That night, in the privacy of Jacob's quarters, the stress finally broke. They want to separate us, Jacob said, pacing. Send you to a research facility, study you like some kind of. Then we leave. Caliph caught him mid-stride, pulling him close. Jacob, I have lived by codes and duty my entire life. But this, what we have, transcends all of that. I can't just desert. Why not? Her challenge was gentle but serious. What do you owe them now? What do either of us owe systems that would deny what we've found? Jacob looked up at her, this warrior who'd become his everything. I never thought I could feel this way about anyone, let alone an alien? A slight smile touched her lips. I never thought I could love at all. My people we don't form attachments like this. But you, Jacob Hayes, have rewritten everything I thought I knew about myself. He pulled her down into a kiss that tasted of desperation and defiance. They made love slowly that night, a counterpoint to their first urgent joining. Caliph whispered words in her own language that sounded like worship, and Jacob responded with his body, showing her everything language couldn't express. As dawn approached, wrapped in each other's arms, they made their decision. The next morning, General Morrison found Jacob's resignation letter on his desk, along with a detailed report on Wraith tactical positions, intelligence valuable enough to shift the balance of the war. By then, Jacob and Caliph were already gone, leaving forward base Arcturus behind on a stolen transport, heading for the neutral colonies where humans and Wraith were beginning to build something new. 6 months later, on the colony of Haven's Edge, Jacob stood in the garden he'd been cultivating, dirt under his fingernails and sweat on his brow. The settlement was small, refugees from both sides, people tired of war, willing to try coexistence. Caliph emerged from their dwelling, carrying their newest project, architectural plans for an expansion of the medical center. She'd been working with human engineers, teaching them Wraith construction techniques. "Your vegetables are thriving," she observed, settling beside him. The garden had become his therapy, a way to create rather than destroy. "Your students graduated today," he countered. "I heard congratulations are in order. 3 new field medics trained in cross-species emergency care." She smiled, and Jacob still marveled at how that expression transformed her fierce features into something softer. "We're building something real here. Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your people? Your rank?" Caliph's hand found his, her fingers interlacing with his despite the size difference. "I regret nothing. My oath was to you, Jacob, but what we have now? This is choice. Every day, I choose you. Choose this life we're building." News from the war fronts was mixed. Some battles continued. But more and more, there were truces. Talks. The image of a human and Wraith building a life together had become symbol enough that others dared to imagine peace. Representatives from both governments had reached out, cautiously suggesting that Jacob and Caliph might serve as mediators. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, the deserter and the oathbreaker, now potential ambassadors. "What do you think?" Jacob asked. "Should we?" "Perhaps." Caliph pulled him closer, and he settled against her chest, listening to the steady dual rhythm of her hearts. "But on our terms. No more following orders that violate our conscience." That night, they made love under Haven's Edge's twin moons, the windows open to let in cool air and the sounds of their thriving community. Caliph was powerful but tender, knowing exactly how to move him, where to touch that made him gasp and arch into her embrace. "I love you," Jacob whispered as she moved within him, her forearms caging him in warmth and strength. "Not because of the oath. Because of everything you are." Her response was in the Wraith language, words she'd taught him over the months. "My heart, my blade, my soul, all yours." When they lay tangled together afterward, satisfied and drowsy, Jacob traced the new tattoo Caliph had added to her collection, a small human heart intertwined with Wraith script. It spelled his name. "I have one more question," she murmured sleepily. "Your human bonding customs, the permanent ones. Marriage, you call it?" Jacob's breath caught. "Yeah. I would like that. To be bound to you not just by oath, but by mutual choice before witnesses. To declare to both our peoples that what we have is not political statement, but truth." Tears pricked Jacob's eyes. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am asking you to let me call you husband." She kissed his forehead gently. "And to call me wife, if you'll have me." "Yes." The word came out choked but clear. "Yes, absolutely yes." The wedding took place a month later, a blend of human and Wraith traditions. Jacob wore formal attire, Caliph wore ceremonial armor painted with love symbols from her culture. The guests were human, Wraith, and several other species who'd found refuge on Haven's Edge. When they exchanged vows, Jacob's voice was steady. "You saved me as much as I saved you. I promise to stand beside you, to build peace not just between our peoples, but in every moment of our lives together." Caliph's response came in both languages: "My oath is fulfilled, yet it has only just begun. I choose you, Jacob Hayes, in this life and whatever comes after. My heart is yours." Years later, historians would mark their union as a turning point, the moment when peace between humans and Wraith became not just possible but inevitable. But for Jacob and Caliph, it was simpler than that. One act of mercy on a battlefield had led to an oath. That oath had become love. And that love had become a foundation upon which two species learned to build a future together. In their garden on Haven's Edge, surrounded by life they'd nurtured and people they'd helped, Jacob and Caliph proved that sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the unlikeliest circumstances. The war was ending. Their story was just beginning.